The Punisher Season 2, Episode 11, The Abyss.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money.
Welcome back, fellow Defenders. This is Defenders TV Podcast, Episode 217, and we are talking about The Punisher Season 2, Episode 11, The Abyss. Hello, I am one of your hosts, John.
And I'm one of your hosts, Derek. Chris, unfortunately, isn't joining us for this one.
No, that is true. Unfortunately, Chris cannot make this episode of the podcast, but we are here, and we will be bringing you The Abyss. Yes, I wanted to shout Robin, like Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, for sure, because she was in The Abyss. She is CIA Director Marion, and there is Maid Marion as well, from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I think, yes, all of them are seminal moments in my childhood. I think I really disliked The Abyss. I didn't kind of get it.
Right.
I absolutely adored Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And of course, The Punisher then is the thing that connects these two because of Marion, the CIA director. But anyway, enough of my 7 degrees of separation and ramblings about this. This is our spoiler-filled review of The Abyss, which is episode 11 in season 2 of The Punisher. And of course, yes, you can get in contact with us over at our Facebook group. You just head on over to facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV Podcast, and you can leave any feedback or thoughts or discussions about this episode of The Punisher.
Yes. We are going on a little bit of break after we've recorded this episode. We'll be on a break in recording terms for about a week. We'll still be putting out 2 episodes a week. Tuesday and Fridays when we usually put the episodes out. But we will put up spoiler posts, so you'll be able to leave your thoughts for the last 2 episodes of the season of Punisher before we record them. We're going to have a good break, so you'll be able to put your thoughts in for the last couple of episodes and for the Punisher as a whole. So if you do want to send us any feedback at all, just email us at feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com. It can be about anything. It can be about the upcoming Marvel movies or any of the episodes of Punisher so far this season. We've really enjoyed hearing your thoughts about the episodes and always enjoy hearing from our fellow Defenders.
Yes, absolutely. And voicemails especially are great to receive to really bring you on board this audio podcast. But on with our spoiler-filled review. Derek, what are some of the episode details?
Well, the episode was written by Laura Jean Leal. It's the first-time writer on The Punisher, but she was a long-term writing assistant during Season 1. The episode was directed by Mira Menon, also a first episode of The Punisher that Mira has directed. She has been involved with other series such as The Wonderful Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, and Glow. A great time for me to promote my little guest spot of The Walking Dead cast is back with Walking Dead Season 9, the Part 2 starting just last week. I have my little comic spot over on The Walking Dead cast with my good friend Lucy Hinney, so come and join us over there if you want to hear some more of me talking comics. But great to have this director on board from Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, and Glow, 3 of my favourite shows.
Yeah, really good. And yes, Derek sounds phenomenally good over on the Walking Dead cast.
I still edit that bit as well, so that's why I sound so good. John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for the episode?
Sure. Arrested and in a critical condition, Frank Castle is under armed guard by the NYPD at a hospital following the killing of 3 women during the assault on Valhalla by Frank and Curtis. Meanwhile, in his hotel room, the Pilgrim, still recovering from his own injuries, receives some crushing news from Eliza Schultz that renews his sense of purpose in his crusade against Frank. In his hospital bed, defenseless and still with a $5 million bounty on his head, Frank is visited by 3 women, Karen Page, the lawyer, Dina Madani, the investigator, and Amy, the rescuer. While Karen calls in a favour at the hospital morgue and Madani examines the 3 prostitutes, Amy puts her fire alarm plan into action to free Frank and rescue him from the Pilgrim, who has arrived at the hospital to get the job done. While Frank evades the Pilgrim, his escape is thwarted by Detective Mahoney.
Welcome back, Karen Page. Really good to see Karen back in this show. We actually knew way before The Punisher was coming out, I think it was the only spoiler I knew about the series, really, that Karen Page was going to appear in here. Sadly, it was because when the announcement came in that Daredevil Season 3 was the last season, the actress Deborah Ann Woll was saying the final time she'll get to play the character of Karen Page was going to be in The Punisher, so she was looking forward to everybody seeing her in this role. And they used her really well in here. Definitely.
It was really good to see Karen Page back. And it's nice to have that closure, I think, with her in The Punisher, given how kind of central she was, that sounding board in season 1 for Frank Castle.
Yeah.
So really nice to see her in this episode, for sure.
Absolutely. Let's get into our bullet points, though, John. First bullet point is Curtis returning to Amy. After that attack on Valhalla by Curtis and Frank last episode, we saw Curtis realizing that he'd killed a guy for the first time, a man who's brought up as a healer, who's gone through the army healing people, and he, because of the actions of Frank, has now killed another human, something that really doesn't sit very well with him. I'm quite interested in this scene, really, because it is the first time you see Curtis kind of standing up and going, I can't be involved in this anymore. And no matter what I try and do, I still end off killing people, and it's only because of Frank. He tries to get Amy out. He calls himself completely out now, putting the blame on Frank, and he's trying to get Amy to walk away as well. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, he gets the right thing from Amy in that she does walk away, but she walks away to rescue Frank. She walks away to rescue Frank. She still has a lot of loyalty to Frank, I think, because of him saving her. And I suppose here, Curtis is coming at it from a different angle. He's seeing him as saving Frank, being, in effect, maybe a little bit of a patsy to Frank. But ultimately, it is that guilt of what he did on the rooftop when Frank attacked Valhalla, the club, or the base. In self-defense, he had to fire. He did his best to just do a wound, but seemingly hit a main artery or something. So, Curtis is broken here. And I think here he really does sort of genuinely put himself right out of the picture here. I think ultimately his comments really just spur Amy, though, to go and actually rescue Frank after she hears exactly where he is on a radio report.
Yeah, and she knows he's in hospital. Obviously, she knows that that he's alive. She knows that the ambulance men have taken him away because of what Curtis says to her. I just think it's probably quite telling that Curtis never shows up at the hospital. We'll talk about the hospital scene. Obviously, everybody seems to show up at the hospital, but it feels like because Curtis doesn't arrive, this could be the last time we see him in the show. This could be the last time we see him in this role. He kind of played this part and he feels like he's being sucked into this. We may see a scene at the end of the series where now that everything's worked out and everything's back to normal, he says goodbye kind of thing, but I feel like he's no longer going to be a person who has Frank's back anymore. Is what it kind of feels like. He's out unless somebody can really convince him otherwise. I think he doesn't want Frank turning up on his door saying, heal my wounds again,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really funny how quickly it changes, to think that they had that really nice conversation on top of the rooftop whilst they were scouting Valhalla, and then because of how it went down, he's kind of like, I have to get out of this.
Yeah.
I've left the army, and I certainly don't want to be a murderer on the streets of New York, which is ultimately what he's become. And so, his sense of reality is a damn sight more real than Frank's,
And so important when you have two characters like Man in Black going around killing everybody in his sights, Punisher killing everybody in his sights, Billy killing everybody in his sights, not really caring about who they kill. It's so important to have a person like Curtis who makes one kill and it weighs so heavily on them. Similar to Amy shooting a guy, not killing him, but her reaction to that, having someone like Curtis also have a similar reaction. It just shows a bit more realism in what would happen if a person is dragged into this big fight, I suppose, between all these people. John, do you want to take us on to bullet point 2?
Sure, yeah. Bullet point 2, Dumont reveals her history.
Oh, finally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was really good. And again, it's just one of those things I wish kind of had arrived a little earlier in this series. Billy is intrigued by these initials in his file and is wondering who is this person. The initials are KM, and it turns out that it's Chris's father. And again, this is where the folded US Stars and Stripes flag above the fireplace, it's her father. He was a military man as well. And in the file, she is basically saying that Billy is like this person, KM.
Yeah.
And in the end, what we have here is this moment where Billy reminds her of her father and what he went through coming back from another tour of duty in another war at a different time. And of course, she was only a child. She had no training, and there maybe wasn't the support structures in place for those returning from war at that time. And ultimately, her father tried to kill her when the parents separated. He didn't want his wife, or his former wife, to take Krista away from him. And so all her scars, these huge scars that you see on her legs, on her spine, on her back, are the result of being dragged out of the window with him as he falls to his death, hoping to kill the both of them, but she survives, seeing her dead father. So this is really tragic, actually. But, you know, this is her motivation. She sees it in Billy and she wants to save him. It kind of expresses quite a lot about their relationship as to why she has put her career on the line. You know, it explains the vertigo, why she is afraid of windows and has that kind of vertigo moment, and it explains the scars. So I'm really glad that we've gotten this moment here, and I'm really glad that the writers, through Billy Russo, challenged Dr. Krista Dumont to reveal her history.
Definitely, yeah. Again, it is something that has been playing on our minds for a while. She said, I fell, and that's how I got the scars early on in the season, you know. It is nice to finally get this explanation from Krista about her history. And it is very tragic, you know, that concept of a father who loves her so much he's not willing to let her live with her mother, kind of thing, is how he would have treated it, but he was mentally ill. She doesn't seem to have any blame for her father for doing it. She just kind of casually says, he died, I lived, but I had to go through a lot to get myself back on my feet. I think it was quite interesting, the conversation with Billy itself. He's very reactionary to her, where he says, you know, who's KM? He's shouting at her, who is KM? Who are these initials that were in my file? Did you love him as well? As if he's challenging her to say to him, oh, it's another former lover of mine. I do this with all of my patients, kind of thing. But it turns out to be much more important to Dumont and how she got into the career in the first place, really. So I think it's a really good backstory for her.
Yeah, and I'm really pleased that it is more than simply, you know, she has slept around a number of her other patients previously. I'm really pleased that it's that, and it's not just gone down some kind of fairly shallow trope. To be honest, I also think it's really good for, you know, this connection in with the military service that we got in season 1, and maybe to a bit of a lesser extent we've gotten here in season 2, or at least it's been continued through. And it's nice to have this moment because, you know, you think back to the young army dude trying to be helped by Curtis, and, you know, Curtis, that's a part-time job. He's not a psychiatrist. He's not a psychologist. He is a volunteer. Here, she is a professional. She can help in a additional way to the circle of trust. You know, she can add to that. And I think you think of the young kid and what he could have done if he'd also had Dr. Dumont's input. You know, even with Jake, you know, Jake ultimately has survived all of this.
Probably in hospital, though.
Probably in hospital, absolutely. But you have heard the veterans with Curtis saying, "Did you see what happened to Jake?" So he's still there, and I think maybe through the combination of Curtis and Dr. Dumont, he has kind of pulled back through and probably the violence of Frank Castle as well. But it's nice that they've had this moment to really have that connection in as well.
Yeah, I think so. And it's very necessary for the character. I know we've been commenting on, you know, how far she's been pushing, you know, that she's almost like the Bonnie to his Clyde. She's almost like his second in command, the person that's trying to push him to do these things so that they can get away and go on the run, you know. So it's nice to have a really good, interesting backstory for her as to why it's so important to her that she saves Billy, that it's another opportunity in her mind to save her father almost, I think that's really important.
Well, I mean, there is that moment where they do talk about just leaving and going on the road somewhere else. And I'm just wondering, is that really going to happen? Are the next 2 episodes, the final 2, are they really going to be focusing more on the Pilgrim and that storyline? Is this kind of also the end of Billy Russo, and Dr. Dumont's story, that they are kind of, as you say, that Bonnie and Clyde moment where they're on the run from the law because she is now tied to Billy Russo. It's not necessarily the fact that Billy Russo will get taken down by Frank Castle here, but I was just interested that they did kind of talk about that. I kind of suspect that they haven't gone on the run, on the road, but in some ways, part of me feels it could be just a nice kind of ending.
Yeah, it would explain a lot. I'm sure they would actually show something more definitive if they were going in the road. But I know what you mean. It could be that moment. That could be the start of the next episode. They're getting in the car and off they go. They could easily end their story there and leave it for a season 3 potentially. Take Billy off the table. Yeah.
No, definitely. But on to bullet point number 3. Madani sees the crime scene. Yes.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting, just purely because Mahoney is effectively only showing Madani the crime scene to kind of blame her for it. I think this is kind of his focus, is to go, and look what you did, Madani, because you brought Castle back to this city. Look how many people are dead. He talks her through it, and he doesn't hold back in the fact that Frank did come through and did kill people that were wearing masks, just like Billy did. So he's obviously done some good in a way. And Mahoney's going, I accept that he obviously was attacked and went through numerous men and took them all out and killed them all. I accept all of that, but look what the outcome was. When he went through all these men, he wasn't minding himself and he killed 3 innocent women, and there is nothing that Madani can say to him that would justify it. There's absolutely nothing that can be said to Mahoney to excuse the fact that Frank has now killed 3 innocents. And I think that's a really powerful statement coming across from Mahoney.
Definitely.
Madani's not willing to believe that Frank did it because she knows Frank intimately. She knows his modus operandi. She knows that's not something that he would do. So that's what makes the whole conversation between the two of them so interesting, because Mahoney's going, you think you do, but when the situation happens, this is what actually goes down.
Yeah, and actually, I think Mahoney is the moral compass here, is the moral center for this. Madani certainly has moved away from being that from season 1, because in some respects, yes, Mahoney is talking that Frank has killed 3 innocent women here, but obviously what we learn later, we know that that's not the case, but it doesn't really ultimately matter because of this turf war, this pride war that involves guns and not law and law enforcement. Then it ends up with people dead, even former veterans. Yes, Billy recruited them. Yes, they've done dreadful stuff. But in the end, none of them have received justice. And I think this is kind of the interesting change in Frank Castle, is that season 1, it was about disfiguring him, scarring Billy Russo so that he lived with what he had done. He felt that guilt, he felt that pain. This season, it is and has been more about Frank effectively putting down the people that he feels needs to be put down. Unless there's been some kind of restraining comment from either Amy, Curtis, or Madani along the way. He has been that more brutal, in my eyes, unjustified kind of approach to what he did in season 1. So I think the great thing that happens here and what Mahoney does is that ultimately the mess is still the mess, even though things change as to what that mess is as this episode goes on. And I think it's really good that he takes Madani here, because she has moved from being the Mahoney-type figure from season 1.
Yeah, and so much has happened to that character, obviously, since season 1, since she was a person working for Homeland in a very high position, trying to get retribution for what happened to her former partner. So much has gone down since then that have changed her as a person. And that, I suppose, is one of the questions, perhaps, that the writers were trying to pose during this season was, there was a chance early on this season that Mahoney could have swooped in with the police officers, taken down Billy and his gang. Madani did give them that information, and if Frank hadn't gone in all guns blazing to kill these guys, perhaps Mahoney and his men could have caught them, or, at the very worst, it could have been a shootout between police officers and Billy and his gang, and I'm guaranteeing if any police officers died in New York City, that gang would not get very far. I don't care how pretty Billy is, himself and his gang would not be getting very far if they'd gunned down a police officer in New York. So that seems to have been part of the conversation that was going on throughout these episodes. I'm glad it's being brought up again by Mahoney here. I'm wondering if the outcome for this, and we'll talk just slightly about what Madani learns, I suppose, here. But Madani does learn at the coroner's office that, as she suspected, and as we talked about actually last episode, Frank is not the one that killed these girls. The angle was wrong. There's no way he could have shot the bullets upwards from the ground into this office, killing all 3 of the women. The bodies all have marks on them showing the gun was up close, killing all 3 of them individually. So they were definitely killed by Billy or some of his men. We find out from Billy it was him that killed each of them. But what I wonder is the outcome of this for Frank that he does become more planning orientated and less walking into a room with an Uzi 9mm and shooting 600 bullets into a room to kill everybody in there and then let God sort them out, I suppose, as the old phrase went. I wonder if that's what will be inflicted on Frank here, is plan better so you'll never get yourself into this situation again. Well,
he certainly does need to reinstigate the planning for sure. I mean, I think what I really like here is that Madani gets this special access to Frank from Mahoney, because even at the crime scene, she's saying to Mahoney, well, it doesn't feel like Frank. And so Mahoney kind of gives her that professional courtesy to go and see if she can glean any more information that may even persuade him otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good. I think for me, though, I am slightly, I suppose, disappointed that it wasn't Frank that actually shot them. I think going to the trouble to bring Madani to her house, to Dr. Dumont's house, with all the risk that has, in order to get the information so that she can turn to Billy Russo and say, I know how to destroy Frank Castle. And then to set it up in a way that the evidence ultimately will always say, in a court of law, probably, that it couldn't have been Frank from the angle of being downstairs in the warehouse, firing up at that kind of office, suspended, on a mezzanine. And I'm kind of like going, even if they had just lined the women up against the windows, that Frank firing up, all the windows were taken out. I presume it was almost like a prefab, so the bullets would have gone through the walls anyway. So I just wish that had happened, really, because I think that would have been really interesting to explore how Frank dealt with that. I think it would have made it even more justified or even more poignant that he then plans stuff. Because now it's just like, well, I've got to plan it so I don't get caught, rather than because I'm killing innocent people. So I don't know. There's part of me that's slightly disappointed that this wasn't an actual thing. But nonetheless, it's just how I feel.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And I think it's still weighing on Frank as if he had done it because he could have, I suppose, is what we see even right at the end of the episode. In the final moments, we still see Frank kind of pushing against this idea of being released from hospital. You see him, everybody else having to take charge of Frank and get him out of there because he just feels, yes, I know this time perhaps I'm not at fault, but I absolutely could have been. I was in a blind rage. I was shooting bullets randomly into walls and windows because that's the way I was being led. And any other chance, there could have been kids in that room. That could have been the nursery, he could have killed kids in there. He could have killed these women in there. Absolutely believable. But you're right, there's no chance he would have gone to prison for this. This absolutely wouldn't have led to a court case. All it would have led to is him going into prison and getting maybe shot to death by a hired hitman who's looking for that $5 million, you know? That's all it would have led to. But yes, exactly like you're saying, John, I agree with you. This wouldn't have broken Frank like the conversation between Dumont and Billy seemed to be saying, that that's what they were going to do, was break Frank, because he didn't kill anybody. He'd find that out pretty quickly. It would make him replan and make sure he doesn't do anything stupid in future, but it wouldn't break him.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's my kind of feeling. I just felt it was a little off kilter.
Yeah.
But I do like how Madani gets into the morgue. You know, Karen pulls this favour from the morgue assistant.
Creepy Ed, John.
Yeah, creepy Ed. And to be honest, it really is creepy, because there is that moment where you think, okay, is this sexual favours?
Uh-huh.
And you're just kind of like going, Karen, what are you doing?
You see it on Madani's face as well.
Yeah,
She's like, I don't really need that. I can just go and get my badge and come back here. You know?
But I do think then seeing him with Karen Page's high heels on later on is just really, really good. Because, Karen suddenly barefooted, and we were like, what on earth? And then you see him pushing one of the gurneys through the corridor as the fire alarm that Amy has set off, and he's walking tall and proud with Karen's high heels on. Really good.
I was wondering, was it a Quentin Tarantino reference because she was barefoot, or a Joss Whedon reference because they always have women barefoot in their movies and TV shows? So I was just wondering, is this a reference? No, it's not. It's just a really creepy favour. But I did love it. A really fun kind of moment between them there. Let's get on to bullet point 4, because we talked a little bit about it already. It's just Frank getting his visitors. I really like this. It actually does seem like a comedy sequence almost. I love this idea that obviously Karen makes her way in. There's no doubt she was going to get there. It's on the news. That's exactly how Amy heard about it. Karen is so connected to Frank. Of course, if she hears something's going on, she's going to get down there. But I love that she uses her credentials from Murdoch, Nelson and Page. This is how we ended season 3 of Daredevil, that they were getting their practice back together. And this is the next show following it. And she says that she's using her credentials to get in the door. So it's nice to know, even though this is not a huge connection to the other show, it's nice to know that in the universe, Nelson, Murdoch and Page is now back together, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. It was really good continuity from Daredevil season 3, which I thought was really nice, to be honest. And yeah, for me, completely agree with you. This was just the best moment in this episode. I love it when Madani comes into the hospital room and you have Karen, Amy, and then Madani all around Frank's bed. It works on a number of different levels because it is funny as well. I love Madani's expression, what are you doing here? What laws are you breaking now? This is the Frank Castle fan club. Really, really nicely done.
Even Karen, when Amy walks in and she goes, I presume you're not a doctor.
Yeah, exactly. Just really, really nice. Yeah. But I also like the fact that it is 3 women that mirrors the 3 women also that Frank killed in the office.
Oh, interesting.
And you have these 3 women trying to help Frank, to clear his name, to reveal the truth, to make him escape. And I really enjoyed that because it feels like each one of those is representing the mistake of or that Frank feels, or the guilt that he feels from killing the 3 women in the office. So I thought this was really a great moment in the episode for a number of different reasons, and I think it's really good to see.
I agree with you. This is an absolutely great scene with Frank and Karen and Amy and Madani. I love that Karen gets her opportunity to just have some time to sit and kind of clear the air with Frank. Remember, they had quite a close-knit relationship in season 2 of Punisher. At the time, she thought Matt was dead. She wasn't going to see Matt Murdock at all. Their relationship had completely stalled, obviously, because of him possibly being dead. And she was sort of taking up a relationship with Frank in season 1 of The Punisher. And he's now putting paid to that. He's saying to Karen, you need to go and get yourself back with stable Matt. He knows Matt's alive. He's telling her to take care of her life. And without him, really, it's really important to him that she moves on. So this is, regardless of whatever happens about The Punisher in the future, it is them closing off their relationship in a really good way. showing that he really does care for her and needs her to make sure that she's taking care of herself and getting herself away from him. We also learn a little bit more about the backstory again, a little bit about the reason why they'd all gone to the fair that day, that his family were all killed, was because he'd actually chosen that this was the final time he was going to be in the army, and everybody believed him when he said it. He had said it before, I believe, is what he's saying to his family.
Yeah.
But for this time, they all realised this is the first day of the rest of their lives, and that's the day that this all went down and all of his family were killed. And Deborah Ann Woll plays a great reaction to that part. She does great reaction in all the show. But that moment when you can see visibly her heart breaking for Frank as he's telling this story, it's a great moment to have between the two characters. And I think really important to have her in that scene as well. Because regardless of all of the other relationships he'd built up with Madani and with Amy and with Curtis, there's nobody else he can really talk like that with other than Karen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they really do have that special connection, and I think it's really nice to see that play out. I think one of the things as well here, we get Madani receiving a phone call from Billy to kind of rub in what's happened.
Yes.
And I like the twist as well that after doing it, from the high of doing it, Billy feels hollow and, begins to take it out on Dumont as she's kind of having none of it. It's like, we did this and now we're going. And I think that's where, ultimately I know that Billy's going to stay because he still feels he needs to get some form of fulfillment by crushing Frank. What he did, whilst it was great, now that it's past, the feeling's gone and he feels hollow. Mm-hmm. Whereas Dumont has this other vision of what they're going to do, and it seems as though that is gradually cracking in this episode.
Absolutely, and it mirrors exactly the conversation that she was having with Madani last episode about what do you do when you put someone in prison, when somebody's been fixated on you? Does that cure your sense of justice? That's the whole conversation she's having with Madani last episode. And what we hear here is, even though Dumont has gone all the way along with Billy's plan to put Frank in hospital and to give him this moment where he thinks he's killed 3 innocent women, Billy doesn't feel any sense of justice, doesn't feel any sense of accomplishment in it. And she thought that would be it. They'd be able to achieve this and move on. And exactly as you say, John, she's having absolutely none of it. She's going, so let me guess, I still don't get what I want here. I've been saying let's run for weeks now, or for days now, and you're saying to me, once we accomplish this, then we can go on the move, and then we can start our new happy life, and I still don't get to achieve that either, So Billy's trying to rub it in with her. He's trying to blame her almost for everything, saying we did a really bad thing here. And she's going, no, I told you what to do. You made these decisions. You're the one that has to live with them. I don't even know those people, so I'm not going to be involved at all in that. So very interesting kind of, I suppose, measured reaction from Dumont to Billy, knowing that he's trying to take everybody down with him and burn the world down like he will do,
No, absolutely. But ultimately, we have this escape then where we see a lot of sleight of hand going on. Mm-hmm. We actually do see one of the sort of bent coppers coming to collect on the 5 million. Yeah, and so Frank is being taken down the stairs after the fire alarm has been set off by Karen Page. Mm-hmm. Amy is the distraction where they think that Frank is on the gurney, on the trolley being taken out, but in fact, it's the knocked out copper.
Yep.
And then ultimately, Mahoney, I love that moment where he sees Karen Page in the corridor, and then literally maybe a minute or a few moments later, he pulls off the sheet, and it's one of his officers on the hospital trolley. Mm-hmm. And he goes into action. He really does, and manages to intercept Madani and actually foil this escape plan. He gets Frank into an ambulance, cuff him to the inside of the ambulance, and is, I think, going to take him off to one of the local precincts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's exactly the question. Where we've left the episode is Frank in the back of that ambulance. We don't know exactly what's going to happen next, but what we do know is there's one other character who has also arrived to pay Frank a visit. Let's go on to our final bullet point for this episode, because there's a big lead into this, and it's a huge moment for the show, really, and for the character. Pilgrim's great loss. we see early on in this episode, there's this aching Pilgrim starting to wake up and return to his senses after this heavy bender that he's been on for probably a day or so. If the description from the phone call makes sense to me, I think it's about a day that he's just been completely uncontactable after the attack that's happened. So you see him waking up. He's totally covered in bruises. He's got the phone call that comes in from Eliza Schultz from his home. He calls her back. Finally, we get it called out. It is John Pilgrim. It's the Pilgrim residence. We've never heard the surname before, so really good to finally get that 11 episodes into the series. But she tells Pilgrim that his wife has been asking to get in contact with him. She's just trying to establish the connection so that eventually when she wakes up from her slumber, that she'll be able to give a call to Pilgrim. He's had all those weird dreams that we talked about last episode where his wife was giving him the permission to finish this final task and then come back to her. What we do see, unfortunately, is as the camera pans back after the phone call, he's told to stay in his room by Eliza, but we see the bed in the room that Eliza is making the call from is empty. So we know at that point that, unfortunately, the Pilgrim's wife is gone.
Well, and the hearse is just about to pull out from the driveway of the Pilgrim's house. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose I was thinking, oh, well, that's a bit shady of Eliza, but then she actually goes to maybe tell him the news in person. I wonder if it's that, or, you know, it comes across as that. But I love the fact here that John Pilgrim really senses the manipulation that is happening here from Eliza Schultz. You know, it's that moment where he kind of just cocks his head and goes, is this God giving me these instructions? Or effectively, he doesn't say it, but the inference is, or is it you?
Yeah.
And I really, really liked this. And I thought, like, it was wrapped up in this huge, huge moment and shock for John Pilgrim, you know, with the loss of his wife.
Absolutely. And there is definitely that moment with Eliza where she's saying to him, you know, remember God used the children of Abraham to control him. Yeah. And that's exactly the reaction is, are you using my children now to control me? And she says very quickly to him, no, you're still serving God, and you will be able to finish this and come home to your children, as she makes her escape out the door, which I just thought was really interesting. It's a great move from Eliza Schultz. It's kind of shouting behind her saying, no, you still have to finish your task and then you'll be able to go home. Right, I'm getting out of here in case you do attack me. He does seem to be stroking his gun quite a lot.
Yeah.
Now, the intercutting between the scene where he's trashing his room and the conversation that's going on with Eliza Schultz, most of the time, that there's no crossover between the two of them, but there are moments there that I was wondering whether he's stroking the gun while she's in the room or not, because he's been made go back to New York, rekindle old friendships with his former colleagues in the drug industry, we'll say, kill a lot of people, basically, all based on the fact that they are going to take care of his wife and get her back to full health, hopefully, or at least keep her alive until he can finish this mission, and then we find out that she's gone. So we all had this conversation very early on in the season. The first time they had the conversation about the Schultz was, were they saying to him, you do the job and we have a treatment that we will give her? Or were they saying, we're going to give her the treatment, you go off and do the job and she will be well when you get back? So my question now is, can they keep control of John Pilgrim now that his wife is gone? Was the deal that they struck, did it actually end off with her dying with some treatment that they could have given to her earlier, but they put off because John was off on the mission? So I'm wondering whether there's a little bit of duplicity here in John Pilgrim. We don't get to see much of that conversation. We just see him going mental in his hotel room. Yeah,
I mean, I think there's loads of duplicity here from Eliza. You know, there's that old chestnut of, you know, your faith will be rewarded and your family will prosper. I think she says along those lines, or your sons will like Abraham.
Yeah.
And of course, his faith hasn't been rewarded because his wife has died, because they promised things that they couldn't and shouldn't have done on the basis of keeping faith.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, that to me is the interesting thing here. And I think, you know, there is that click in his mind as to, well, what has it all been for? Because, you know, he's broken, he's bruised, he's in New York City, he has killed, he's reconnected in with his far-right former gang members that, you know, he left 12 years ago. And for what? Because whilst he's been away, his wife has died on the promise that maybe I always took it to be some kind of experimental procedure, because the Schultzes were so wealthy that they were able to do this kind of procedure that, I don't know, had come in from Switzerland or something like that.
Yeah.
But it ultimately was experimental.
Yeah, and I know they never promised to keep her alive, but they definitely were saying, just do this job, we'll take care of her, experimental treatment. You know, it was very much this feeling of, we'll do everything we can with her while you're away, and she'll definitely be here when you get back, kind of thing. Do the job quickly, and then you'll get back to her, kind of thing.
Well, exactly. I mean, and again, like you say, that gun was kind of hovering, and the fact that Eliza was on her knees as well initially, to get down to his level, because he was on the floor as well, sobbing from the bad news that he received. But then he gradually raises himself up. She's still on her knees, and I just thought there was going to be a bullet to the head, to be honest. But yeah, and then it's like, and then I got out of there because she just had to go. The other thing as well, on a complete side note, I was massively distracted by a huge vein running down the side of her face. It was massive.
It was.
Well, she does press-ups with her face.
She was under a lot of stress. This is the mother of Clark Kent, isn't that right? From Smallville?
Certainly is, yeah.
All right, Smallville.
Great.
I don't think we ever mentioned it throughout the series. The actress who plays Eliza Schultz was Clark Kent's mother on Smallville.
Yeah, great. I absolutely loved Smallville, and she was fab as his mum.
Excellent. One final beat in the episode really shows John Pilgrim arriving at the bedside of Frank Castle, but there's no bed in the room, obviously. Amy's taken the bed away with the police officer in it. So now we have it set up: Pilgrim, a man who's lost everything, versus Frank Castle, a man who's lost everything, versus Billy Russo, a man who has clawed himself back twice from losing everything, as he was described by Dumont. So that's going to be an interesting setup for the last two episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've set it up really well for the last two episodes. I still do think there's elements here that, like with John Pilgrim here, like with Dumont, that I think you could have brought in earlier.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely.
But I do think it's a good setup for the last 2 hours of this show, basically. So yeah, great stuff.
Yeah. So John, do you defend The Punisher Season 2, Episode 11, The Abyss?
I do. I give it 4 bulging Eliza veins out of 5. Yes. It was either that or...
It was very distracting, obviously.
It was, yeah. Or it's either that or it's 4 high heels, lab coats, and hospital trolley out of 5.
Nice.
In reference to Creepy Ed, I think. No, I really liked this. I loved this episode. I think it really sets up, as we've just said, for the last 2 episodes. But I think, importantly, I do like the connections made here between the 3 women in Frank's life and the 3 women that thinks he's taken the life of here. I think that's really nice. It's both touching. You have those moments with him and Karen where they really connect. You have Amy wanting to rescue Frank in the same way that he rescued her, because she knows that there's this 5 million bounty still on her head. And I suppose despite the inherent contradictions of Madani wanting to be a law enforcer but giving Frank a free rein, she still wants to investigate, and in some ways at least soften the blow of what Frank has actually done or people think he's done. So I really like that. I love the moral center of Mahoney. I mean, I think he is the one that comes out of this smelling of roses ultimately. And you have this, great, really tense moment between Eliza and John Pilgrim, where you just wonder what he's going to do here. Is he happy being manipulated? Does he see it at all? I think he does.
He does, yeah.
But Eliza kind of getting wise to the fact that she kind of needs to hot tail it out of that hotel room.
Yep.
Really, really good. And I must say, this movement of 3 people now having lost everything, 2 of which, I think in particular with Frank and with the Pilgrim, having very similar kind of stories, I think, here. It is really, really good. So yes, I do defend this episode. Derek, do you defend episode 11 of The Punisher season 2? What? No.
I absolutely love this episode of The Punisher. Really, really cool idea. Having the gang all get back together, and that moment when Madani's phone rings when she's in the room with Karen and Amy and Frank, and they're all kind of looking at each other going, why is everybody in this room? And then the phone rings and Billy's on the other end of the phone. It's like, oh, can we have a conference call here and have Curtis on another line and somebody else on another line? It just seems like this great moment when everybody is just barreling to the same location, all doing their best to either save Frank, help Frank, or accuse Frank of something. I think it's just quite interesting. And Frank just on his bed wanting to turn over and cry about how bad this situation went, how cocky he was beforehand, and how broken he is now in this bed. And the only person in this whole Marvel Cinematic Universe that could help him out is Karen Page. I love that they brought her in for this episode. Thought she was used so well. It's very difficult to get a crossover to work anymore with these shows, especially if it's only a one-episode crossover. So it's great to have our Karen Page back in this episode and used so well. Loved that she had the ability to use her access to the morgue to help out Madani, to help Frank with the kind of knowledge that she hadn't had of him in the past. Just a great setup there. And yes, I'm really interested to know what's going to happen with Mahoney. Is he going to get into the front of the car and then shots start ringing out around him from the Man in Black, and then he releases Frank directly against him outside the hospital? Will something else go down? You know, it's really interesting to see what happens in the next episode. But yes, really interesting, insightful episode. Great to hear what happened to Dumont. I wish that had been earlier in the season. Great to have this moment between John Pilgrim and Eliza Schultz. A question we had in the past was, how complicit was Eliza Schultz in this? Was she just standing back and taking care of the kids? It seems she is just as knowledgeable about everything that's going on with John Pilgrim as her husband is. She knows exactly what's going on, and she knows exactly the buttons to push to get the Pilgrim to do their bidding as the Schultz family empire, I suppose. So that's really interesting in itself. So can't wait for these last 2 episodes, definitely.
Yeah, no, it should be really, really fantastic. But with that, on to some feedback. Yeah, our first bit of feedback comes in on episode 11 through Facebook. You can head on over to facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV podcast and leave any thoughts or comments on any of the episodes of The Punisher through our spoiler posts. Kristen Howell over on Facebook says, I think this is my favourite episode of the season. Not the most exciting, but the after effects that sit in everyone's mind throughout the episode following last week's shootout was brilliant. Mm-hmm. I'm absolutely disgusted with Krista, and it seems maybe she was the driving force of Billy's destruction into madness. Question mark. Seeing Karen again was done beautifully, and I loved how she didn't believe for a second that Frank was capable of killing those women. All in all, a fantastic episode. Looking forward to your breakdown.
Thanks so much for that feedback, Kristen. Always good to hear your feedback on this. Interesting thought there. Krista is the driving force behind the destruction of Billy into madness, his brain messing up and going crazy. Chris had his theory very early on in the season that Krista was someone that is absolutely out there to manipulate Billy Russo. Has it just come to fruition in the episode and we just missed it? You know, we have that moment where Billy's lining up the bullets on the table, going, look at the bad thing we did today. Look, we killed these innocent women. And Krista Dumont is sitting back going, wasn't me. I didn't pull any triggers. I told you how to get him and you did it yourself. Is she building Billy's mind back up into basically doing her bidding in a way?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's really interesting theory, Kristen, for sure, that she could be the puppeteer behind Billy Russo, ultimately. Yeah, because in many respects, I had kind of felt that she was more of a sympathetic character, where this was all down to her own childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm. Whereas she could just be using that to get Billy on side, effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Thanks so much for that, Kristen. Really good to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristen, for your thoughts. It's really good to get your feedback on episode 11. Remember, fellow defenders, to subscribe to any punishing or pacifist podcast catcher over at defenderstvpodcast.com. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts, and of course many, many more. Remember to rate us or leave a review. To share the podcast is to share the love.
Absolutely. And as we said, we're on a big batch of recording our podcasts to get them out while we go on a little bit of a break. So that means you do have a bit more time from when we're recording anyway, to when you need to get your feedback in for episode 12 and 13. I'll be putting the spoiler posts up in our Facebook group in the next couple of days, and you can pop in your thoughts about any of the episodes for the season. We have lots of time to get your thoughts in. So thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, excellent stuff. We'll be back with our review of The Punisher Season 2, Episode 12, the penultimate episode of this season of The Punisher, and it's called Collision Course.
What a shockingly accurate name for what's happening to all of the characters in this show.
Absolutely.
Perfect name. Thanks so much for joining us, fellow defenders. Talk to you next time.
As always, fellow defenders, thank you so much for listening. It has been a pleasure discussing all things Punisher-y with you today. In the vein of Johnny Storm in Fantastic Four, vein on. And after that, we'll speak with you again next time. Bye.
That really did get to you, didn't it?
It really did, yeah. Well, I don't really have veins. I do, they just don't come to the surface in such shocking ways.
Okay, that's the weirdest revelation we've ever had in the podcast. Bye now.
Bye.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money.
Welcome back, fellow defenders, to Defenders TV Podcast, episode 217, where we are talking about The Punisher, Season 2, Episode 11, The Abyss. Robin! I am one of your hosts, John. I was doing Maid Marian, CIA Director Marian.
She wasn't even in this episode.
Played by Mary Mastrantonio.
Not even close. Played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio.
Played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. He has been that more brutal injustice. He has been that more brutal, in my eyes, unjustified